EU Council President Charles Michel has scheduled a new summit in January to discuss financial aid for Ukraine, after Hungary's Prime Minister vetoed a plan to send another €50 billion to Kyiv. Viktor Orbán blocked the move at the European Union leaders' meeting in Brussels and later suggested that Hungary should first receive the EU funds he believes it deserves. The European Commission has withheld billions from Hungary over concerns about rule of law in the country. Mr. Orbán went on to say that he can still stop Kyiv from joining the bloc, despite yesterday's agreement to start talks on the issue. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said enduring support for Ukraine would send a strong message to the Kremlin.
Ukraine has not only taken a major step forward on its path towards the European Union, it can continue to rely on our support. The Russian ruler is only waiting for Europe's resolve to weaken. He is counting on our commitment to Ukraine to slacken. Well, Putin is very much mistaken, for we will do whatever it takes for Ukraine, for as long as it takes.
Well, our Brussels Bureau Chief, Alexandra von Namen, has been following those leaders' talks. Welcome, Alexandra. The German Chancellor's words that we heard just then, very reassuring, but contradicted, surely, by the EU's actions. Yes to talks about joining the bloc, which could take decades, while Hungary stands in the way of extra funds for Ukraine right now.
Well, you're right, Phil, especially when we consider that it took a trick, a workaround, to reach the agreement on the accession talks. It was legitimate and legal and still a workaround. And it was Olaf Scholz's idea to ask Viktor Orbán, the Hungarian Prime Minister, to step out of the room and have a coffee while the other leaders can go on and vote on the accession talks without facing the Hungarian veto. And Olaf Scholz said that that should be not the new normal. And the question, of course, is how the leaders are going to deal with the other blockade by the Hungarian government, them blocking the long-term aid for Ukraine.
OK, so the Kremlin has now praised Viktor Orbán's stance. So perhaps you can give us an idea of what Mr. Orbán has been saying and what he wants.
Well, the Kremlin praised Viktor Orbán for defending the interest of the Hungarian people, as they put it, and they indicated that they think that the European Union and all the other leaders, they are hurting the interest of their people by helping Ukraine and by opening the accession talks with Kyiv. And that is what the Kremlin very often does, that they exploit existing divisions, they try to drive a wedge between partner countries, and they play on fears and concerns of the European people. And still, we cannot just dismiss it as a pure propaganda, because the Kremlin really views Viktor Orbán as its ally in Europe. He has repeatedly blocked or delayed measures that would hurt Russia, and he has been increasingly being criticized as Putin's agent in Europe, something that Budapest denies. And still, fact is that Viktor Orbán's actions and decisions undermine the European Union's unity in the face of Russia's war on Ukraine.
Thank you for that. DW Brussels Bureau Chief Alexandra von Namen. Well, that agreement to begin membership talks is a bit of welcome news for Kyiv. Here's how some Ukrainians have been reacting.
A diplomatic win amid a stalemate on the battlefield. As Ukraine endures another winter at war with Russia, progress in joining the EU is a boost to morale on the streets of Kyiv.
It is a very important decision. It proves that a big team of Ukrainians in embassies are working. They don't sleep at night to make sure we get to this result. That's why I believe it's a very good decision. It is another step forward towards our victory. I certainly want Ukraine to be with the European Union. I don't want my children to know what war is. If we are not with the European Union, I personally think that the war can repeat again and again.
It proves Ukraine's civilized choice, which will ultimately lead to a break of ties with Moscow. Ukraine will finally join the family of European nations.
Ukraine has wanted to join the EU for years, but it still faces a lengthy process to align laws and standards with the bloc. But the agreement to even begin talks is being seen as a win by President Volodymyr Zelensky.
This is a truly remarkable result for Ukraine and for Europe, another step towards Ukraine's membership of the EU. Now, in Ukraine, many people are in high spirits and it's important, it's motivating. I congratulate all of you on what's been achieved by all of us who, through the unity of Ukraine, are strengthening the unity of Europe.
The biggest obstacle to Ukraine's membership is Hungary's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. He's already blocked EU aid funding and is threatening to veto the membership process at any time, leaving Ukraine with a long and challenging road ahead.
Let's bring in our correspondent, Nick Conley in Kyiv. Welcome, Nick. So tell us more about what people are saying about this EU summit.
Well, Ukraine didn't get everything that it hoped for. This is certainly bittersweet to an extent, but it has to be said the most important thing was that promise of eventual membership. There's significant fear here in Kyiv that Ukraine will be fobbed off with some kind of second-class status, some kind of partnership that might see money flowing this way, but not the full guarantee of that integration with the bloc, something that's seen as crucial for Ukraine's economic recovery as soon as the military situation stabilises, at least. So there's a real sense of relief, and there's an expectation that that money will come, that eventually, that new meeting planned for the early next year will arrive. And it has to be said, in terms of the money, this is all pretty long to medium-term stuff. Ukraine is not immediately at risk of going bankrupt. Of course, this money is crucial. The money promised is more than Ukraine is set to need to make up the shortfall next year. Obviously, it's planned for several years, but it is of such a magnitude that it is, crucial to Ukraine's balancing its books. But for now, it seems, for Volodymyr Zelensky, this was much-needed good news and something that Ukrainians can feel good about after a fairly grim couple of weeks that we've just seen.
OK, so Viktor Orban notwithstanding, it's a long old road towards EU membership, something like 10 years. So what sort of homework has Brussels set Kyiv?
So there's the normal stuff in terms of harmonising standards, making sure Ukrainian laws are the same as European Union kind of directives. That is all to be expected. And I think most of that is pretty easy to do. It is a question of just lots of laborious legal work in Parliament, making sure that all stacks up. The more problematic issue is obviously corruption. That has long been the main criticism from Western supporters of Ukraine, that not enough has been done to make the judiciary independent and to really crack down, especially on kind of top-level corruption, VIP people with the access to top political figures who have historically got away from any kind of judicial persecution in this country. I think it has also to be said that this is about the EU's readiness to take on Ukraine. We've seen a lot of weariness in Western capitals about the kind of unwieldiness of the bloc now at its current size. And in recent weeks, we've seen significant kind of pushback from farmers in Slovakia and Poland, scared of competition from Ukrainian grain coming in, from truck drivers scared about more competitive Ukrainian companies coming into their market. So I think it's a kind of two-way process. And there is going to be a big issue for these Eastern European countries who historically have been the biggest beneficiaries of EU aid, having maybe now to compete for Ukraine for all that money coming from Brussels.
OK, thanks for that, Nick. DW correspondent Nick Conley in Kyiv.